What's up, everybody? This is John from Coding Addict, and welcome to another Power Hour live stream. As always, I'm joined by one and only Mr. Paul Bratlovsky, the mastermind behind Coding After 30 channel. How are you, Paul?
Pretty good. How are you today?
I'm having some sleep issues, actually, since the last live stream. So I have this weird thing where I wake up at 4 in the morning, and I just cannot go back to sleep. I'm just staring at the ceiling. And the thing is, you cannot like from one part you can say okay, you can go and work, but like the brain doesn't work either. So for the last like 4 or 5 days, what I've started doing is I wake up, I have 24-hour gym like right around the corner. I mean, American around the corner, 10 minutes drive with the car, and then I just go there, work out, come back home. Don't drink coffee, otherwise that's a nightmare. Basically have breakfast and then go to sleep for another hour, hour and a half, and then start the day. So hopefully this will end soon because it's not particularly sustainable. How do you have any particular plans for Thanksgiving? Anything special coming up?
Just hang out with my friends. That's it. Because in Texas, none of my family's here, so I'm staying local. But I am going to spend like the New Year's with them. Excited for that. But for Thanksgiving, just try not to eat too much. That's it.
Basically, Paul is in the middle of the big move, so I'm not gonna share any more details. He can share it himself if he wants, but we both have like situations right now, pretty much. So, this might be on and off and all that. Yeah. So that covers. Yeah, I don't like turkey, and so pretty much what we do like bunch of stuff that we used to, let's say, like, that we eat back home. So that kind of is for me a thing because it kind of, I don't know. When you're growing up, like we didn't have, you know, basically it wasn't in such an abundance as it is right now. So it's just kind of good memories of whatever we cook. So yeah, nothing much really. Used to watch football, not anymore. The kid sees the TV and right away starts asking for the cartoons. So nothing there. Um, yeah, if you want to check out some cool content, be sure to visit Paul's channel, Coding After 30. And while you're there, be sure to smash the like button. How's the blog thing going? I think the last one you were building the blog, you added to the custom project. How is that?
Yeah. I said, yeah, yes, yep. So I did add for the custom. I had the blog section, and so next step, I'm kind of debating if I should uh, add markdown. So whenever you write your blog in markdown, and it'll parse it to HTML, or if I want to work on the developer section where you have like a bunch of names of developers and you could click on them, you could get the basic information about them and see their blog posts that they wrote. So it's going to be one or the other. We'll see. Um, you know, it's constantly evolving in my head, like what I should build.
And you eventually think about doing the that bug tracker, right? But meaning like in some sort of way, but that's gonna be like your subscriber thing, as I understand.
Yeah. So I'm still kind of trying to figure everything out. So I do want to, like a lot of people have been asking me how they could support the channel. So I did make a private community that I will let people know how to join eventually once I figure out how to make it work. We are going to be building a bug tracker, which will have like authentication, full CRUD, because I think it's like a pretty good application and it's useful too. Like you could use it to manage what you're building on. And so that's going to be part of the private community that I will let you guys know when I'm able to like take money.
Yeah, so that's gonna be a great custom project, and in general, yeah, Paul is building the custom project right now, so be sure to check out his live streams. Bunch of very useful info, and hopefully, when we're done with tips or whatever, I might ask you. I don't know whether you want to share the how you built, let's say, timers and all kinds of cool stuff. I actually have a question for you, and for you, and for pretty much everybody that's watching. So essentially, I started recording a MERN course, but I made decision not to start from the scratch, right? Because when you're talking about MERN, you have Node and you have, of course, React. And for me, learning Node, meaning learning MERN from scratch, is I think it's kind of a waste of time because in my opinion, you should know already React and you should know Node and Express. and therefore I made it kind of required. And basically, I did that because I already have a bunch of like free videos on React and Node Express, and I think it's kind of unfair for people who already took my React and Node Express course if I'm gonna make Mern course and start everything from scratch. Like for me, that kind of is unfair to them, right? So what I've decided on last thing, basically, then the course is going to be 80 hours long if you start everything from scratch. I essentially just want to build the project, and already the projects are going to be long without covering everything from scratch. And at the beginning of the course, I'll make basically a I'll just say the requirement where people are expected to know such and such, right? Such things in React and such things in Node. My question is following: what do you think as a student and in general, in your opinion, what is better? So essentially, there's two options. I can tell them like, look, these are the things you need to know. These are the courses you can take, and these are the free videos that you can take. And if they take those free videos, if they watch them, they will be up to speed. Second option, you can add projects like they will be, most likely two projects. And then you can add that content at the end as an extra content. But the thing is, it's going to be like 24 hours of content. It adds basically a bunch of content that people might look at and be like, okay, the course is technically 50 hours long, but 24 hours of it is, the content you're supposed to already know before that. So as a student, which one would you
Right.
prefer better? Going somewhere for resources like videos, or having actually that content in the course as an extra content? How would you approach that? To everybody who's listening as well, if you could just leave it in the comments, and then I'm going to go through and then I'm going to check, what do you think? Because it's kind of most important thing is for me to understand the people who actually are watching my content, what's their opinion on the best approach. And then I already kind of made the decision, but I just want to kind of run by everybody here. So what do you think in your opinion?
I mean, for me, just like when you talk, like you said, you talk about Mern, it's just combining, React with MongoDB and creating an Express backend. So I think like, you have to have an understanding of Node and React, like as a prerequisite. And so I think, if people don't have the prerequisites, you have those other courses or other resources that they could go and watch. And to make this course not be, 80 hours is you will provide some sort of template or something to help people get started. So you're focusing on Mern rather than trying to rebuild those individual things. And I know some people might, be upset by it, but at the same time, it's like you can't do everything at once, and you should have some sort of prerequisite. That's why like, you got to learn HTML and CSS before you learn JavaScript. Once you learn JavaScript, then you learn React, and then so on and so on. And I think, in my opinion, I think you're going to be able to give better value doing it that way for the people that want to just get more details on how to build a project with Mern and not having to build every little thing from scratch, or even like having to relearn React since they should already be familiar with it.
No, for me, that's kind of one of those things. It's like between a rock and a hard place. I know that people will complain regardless, but again, I just want to run by people who actually like consume my content, because their opinion is way more valuable to me than somebody who's just going to come out from the side and just complain regardless. So that's why I kind of like that's what I'm thinking, that essentially in the beginning, I'm just going to say, look, I'm going to list the things that you should basically, the person should know, because we'll build on top of those things instead of covering from scratch what is happening, whether that is the express route or whatever. And then
Yeah.
essentially I'll just say, look, you can take my course, or you can have these free videos that pretty much will get you up to speed. And if you want, you can take it. If not, then that's really up to you, kind of. So I think we cover that. Okay, weekly tips and fails. I actually borrowed this from Paul. So Visual Studio Code has the bracket pair guides that essentially draws a line from the one bracket to another one, showcases the code snippet, and it might sound silly, but it's actually very useful. And the way you add that one, and I'll add this one in description. Essentially, you do that in settings.json. You go with editor.guides.bracketPairs, and then you set it equal to true. And Paul, I think, liked this on his Twitter, and his Twitter handle is at coding30. And then a few days ago, he liked it, and I'm like, yeah, this, and then I installed it, and I'm like, this is actually very useful. So I borrowed from him this one. What about you?
Yeah, no, it's a good tip. I not like, I mean, I have lots of failures, but for a tip, I started using, GitHub Copilot, and I've really been enjoying it because it's actually pretty good at kind of suggesting, some of the things like you should do. So obviously, if you don't know how to code, it's going to be very useless for you because you don't understand the stuff they're recommending. But if you know what to code and you kind of know what you're kind of expecting or looking for, it's really good to kind of just type stuff out and kind of get stuff working. I was really, really impressed with it. So I've been kind of enjoying that. And it's been saving a lot of time for me because a lot of the stuff, sometimes it gets things really, really wrong. And then a lot of times it's like reading your mind. It's like, oh, I thought exactly of that. Oh, this is fantastic. So that's my tip. And it's been really helping me be productive at work, which is insane because I write a lot more code much faster and I get it to work. And then what I do is I'll go back and I'll refactor it to make it better, organize better. So that's my tip of the week. Spilled my secret, how to be super productive.
Some people have been actually asking about this. Is there still a waitlist?
So I believe there is, but I've waited for a long time. But my friend, who I just recommended to try it out, he was able to get approved fairly quickly. So I think it's much faster now. The wait isn't that long, and I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about it. They're like, AI is going to take our jobs or like whatever, but at the same time, it's like, if you don't know how to code, it's not going to help you to write code at all. Like, I'm not even worried about it, but it's pretty impressive, like the capabilities that it has. I'll give you one example. So this is how smart the AI is. So I'm randomly starting from scratch and I'm making a thing where, I want to talk about IMD movie listings, right? And apparently IMD IDs, they have a very specific ID that they use, which is like, I think it's like 2 characters and then a bunch of numbers. And not only when I put like movie name or IDMB ID, it would recommend the name of the movies. So it said like Shawshank Redemption, like it literally will put that in. And then for the IMDb ID, it would put the ID following that exact pattern that IMD uses, like the 2 letters. And I was like, oh my God. Then if you want to add another like movie listing in your array of objects, it will recommend, it'll change the ID by itself. It'll put a different name and put a different description. So it's kind of pretty insane. And I guess the way it works is basically just studied all the public GitHub and it just kind of knows what you're trying to do. It's pretty scary, but pretty awesome at the same time.
There have been quite a few like examples where like Wes Boss shared some about comments where it's just spitting out like exactly what you're looking for in some other ones as well.
It's insane. It's
definitely, I think, something that's going to be part of the reality. Like, well, it is already, but I think it's going to just be more and more. But again, I also agree with you where I think there's, ever since, I don't know, I remember there's always been this thing where all the programmers are going to be replaced and this and that. I don't think that's going to be the case. It's just going to be more productive because, I mean, like it or not,
100%.
But you still need that input, of deciding what you're going to do.
Final decision. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. That's at least.
Yeah, and then from like another standpoint, if you're learning, a lot of recommendation, it will recommend something you might have not seen yet, and then you could look into farther and being like, well, why are they showing me this code? Why are they showing it this way? And like I'm actually, learning at a faster rate because I get those recommendations that then I like think about and inquire about that I would have never thought about. You know what I mean? And so it's like, oh, I didn't even know you could do that. Like I'll give you an example. So when working with GraphQL, once like whatever, like you pass bunch of properties into your mutation, and one of them is called uncompleted. And that's what I normally do. So when first whatever call happens, it waits for uncompleted, and then it'll do a bunch of stuff. But then in some cases, you could also just append .then and then put your code in there. And I didn't even know you could do that. And then today, like, it recommended to me do .then, and it worked. Excuse me, I don't mean to swear, but like, I was like, wow, this is so awesome. And in my case, using .then made way more sense than the other way I've been doing it. And then like I looked and read the docs, and they're like, oh yeah, like that returns a promise, so you could definitely do .then after that. I would have never known if get pilot, whatever, didn't recommend it to me. So I was like, wow, this is cool. This is cool.
Was it easy or hard to install? Like setup and everything?
No, yeah, super easy. You just literally just install it and log in with your GitHub. It's super easy, straight to the point, and I'm blown away. Like, it's like I get more exposure to code while writing code, if that makes sense. And so you just learn so much faster, and it's cool. Like, I like it a lot. I don't tell my boss I'm using it because I don't want him to think how fast I'm able to do stuff, but it's good.
Well, we'll definitely have to figure out how we can discuss this in more detail. I'm very curious about this one. Now, before I forget, few people have asked about the thumbnail, the Power Hour one. So it was created by Haley, and as you can see, she's a very creative graphic designer. She's easy to work with, provides a bunch of cool input, and she's very patient, which is huge for me since when it comes to design, well, let's just say it's a struggle. And I'll leave her profile link in the description, so if you ever need a designer for your web project, be sure to look up Haley. Okay, and as far as our main theme this week, we've got throwaway projects. Now, I know initially that I put in the title essentially repetition, but I think it kind of just makes sense, the throwaway projects. And for me, throwaway projects are the same as CRUD. Essentially, it's highly underrated, in my opinion, since everybody, well, okay, I'm not going to use the word everybody, but there's a lot of people who are dissing on a CRUD, and I kind of find it that the same thing is happening with throwaway projects, but for me, they're crucial part of learning and basically building stuff. They won't show up in your portfolio, but they will play a crucial part when you need to build those big and complex portfolio projects. And like I said, I build them all the time, whether I'm learning something new or I just want to try out some new feature. And I do that effectively for two reasons. First, I like the fact that you can separate the logic. So I can try out some feature without worrying about, what is going to happen in the state and what is going to happen in some other part of my application. I just have this tiny sandbox where I can experiment, try out other setups, other properties, and all that. And then I'm just good to go. And then I can implement in the bigger project. And I do push them to the GitHub. And I know that a lot of people, especially in the beginning, are a little bit scared about what, employer or whatever can think of, just pushing these random kind of code snippets or whatnot. Now, in my experience, no one has ever from the company said, hey, why you have this silly example there in your GitHub? It's more like you're just putting them up there so you can always access them. I definitely, if I can make a suggestion, I would say rather push it up to the GitHub, that throwaway project that will never show up in your portfolio, instead of, trying to keep it on a computer, because A, it's going to be easier to access, and B, no one really goes through your GitHub and says, okay, why you have this silly example where you have that one. That has at least never been the case, in at least for me. And then second, why I like the throwaway projects is because of repetition. Now, I definitely agree with Paul that when it comes to bigger projects, you do need to push yourself to add and learn something new with each project. But when it comes to small throwaway ones, I actually repeat stuff very often. At least in my case, I remember things better that way. So essentially, I can literally build like 5 small projects that are almost the same. But then by that third, fourth, or fifth one, I'm like, okay, you know what? I definitely understand how that feature works. So now I can put it up in, in a bigger project. Now, I'm not saying that every time you have to do, 5 repetitions or whatever, but there are some concepts that, maybe have some edge cases or whatever, and that's why it's always better where you have the basic setup in one project, then you have this setup in the other one, and kind of, at least that's how I approach it. And I can give you a use state example. So when it comes to learning use state hook, in my opinion, it's much more useful if you spend time setting up, let's say, one use state example where you have just a list right in your project, right? So it's hard coded. You just render it. Then you set up another component, another example. I mean, you don't even need to set up another project. You can just set up another component where you're rendering list, maybe you're fetching data. Then you're removing data. And trust me, by that 5th time or whatever, when you build that small throwaway project, you'll have way better understanding of use state instead of right from the get-go building a Netflix clone. Because the problem with those big projects is that by the time you're pretty much, I don't know, 2-3 hours in, you already forgot the initial part. And and it's very hard after that to go and pick it up and then again start from the scratch. Now, lastly, I do want to mention that I don't waste my time on CSS in this case, unless it's some kind of CSS feature that I'm trying to implement. And unless maybe you struggle with CSS in a sense that you're still, learning, some basic CSS properties, then it's actually useful if you have, let's say, a small JavaScript feature you want to learn, so you can throw in there HTML and CSS. But in general, I found that it takes way longer for me. So all of them are bare bones. I sometimes can add some inline style just so I have a little bit of margin because it's annoying when everything is in one corner. But in general, no CSS whatsoever. What's your opinion on this one?
Yeah, I started, well, let me back up here. I would do a lot of these smaller projects, which I would kind of start and I would never finish. So to me, those became called my throwaway projects. But I realized that every time I did that, I would be learning something. So even though I didn't finish the big project, I was gaining the experience from trying something. Then after a while, and after like talking to you like a while back, I was like, you know what? I need to go back and do more of these smaller projects where you're literally doing something for the sake of learning it and getting the repetition. And that's been helping me a lot. Also, like I started doing them a lot in CodePen because it's like you can't develop a full application in CodePen, so it kind of limits you. So that way you don't overdo it. You just do the thing that you want to do, try it out, and kind of have it here. So like I think it's like really good for people to learn. The one thing that I started to do for my throwaway projects, it's like maybe in my state now, it's like, okay, I'm working on this big application. They need to have, let's say, pagination. So my throwaway project could be pagination. Or it's like I'm working on this project. They need to have a data table. So my throwaway project is that data table. And so after I'm done with them, I have them as notes to reference towards my work project that I'm doing now. So that's kind of like the next tip that I started to do. Instead of having just random, it's like, try to find a problem that you're trying to solve, get a bunch of repetition solving it, and then now you have the experience of doing it, you have the code examples, and you made something that either your bigger project uses or you're trying to figure out how to work. So that's been kind of like my thing now. So it works pretty good.
100% agree with that. 100% that's my approach. And I'm a big sucker for repetition. For me, I've always been told all my life, like repetition is the mother of all knowledge, and just to kind of laugh at that. But this, I definitely, for me, just repeating. And I know for some people they don't like it. I actually enjoy doing that part, the repetition. And at some point where I'm like sick of it, I know. Okay, now I know. Now, if the moment I get to okay, I understand. Okay, this is already maybe too much. Then I'm like, okay, I'm good to go. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think there is a drawback for me because I'm really lazy. So now when I find that I'm like, oh, like I need to make a card. I'm like, I already made a card before. So I literally copy and paste that code into an existing project rather than doing it from scratch. Like, I don't think that's the right way of doing it, But at the same time, you kind of come up with this library of things that you've done that makes it easy for you to implement. Like, I'm not saying you guys should copy and paste, but
This is a
I've done
good
that
point.
sometimes.
I mean, we're not talking about like if you'll rebuild everything, let's say hero sections all the time,
Yeah,
right, or whatever.
exactly.
I mean, as you're
That's the
progressing,
point.
let's say for me a big thing that when I started with Node, I just rebuilt those features time and time and time and time again, and then by the end of it, you're like, okay, now I'm just comfortable and familiar and all that. It's not like, yeah, no, there's only so many times you can build the pagination. You
Yeah,
understand, okay, this works
yeah,
on front end. Maybe there's other iterations, but it works. So, okay, I'm just going to use this one. But yeah, for me, exactly like you're talking about, you need to implement something. Again, there's cases where you can do it in a bigger project, no problem. But then there's cases where I like to just drag everything to the sandbox and be like, okay, so how this little feature works and how that one, and how is this going to be affected? And then it's very easy to transfer, very easy to the big project. And maybe there is a gotcha along the way, but way less than trying to figure everything out while the kind of ship is moving or whatever. At least in my opinion.
yeah,
So
yeah, and yeah. And for all my throwaway React projects, I use style components to make sure that it is just as simple as drag and drop for a majority of the stuff that you do. It's good, you know.
sign out, we got another hater right from the get go. The ones who don't even watch the thing and right away put the dislike. So that's
This
this
like
is
yeah, that
that's probably one of my I have a specific group of people who are well, I have blocked them and they dislike my content, so it's definitely one of them, I can bet you.
yeah.
um
It's crazy how people they just automatically dislike, with like not even give a chance. It's like, oh, dislike,
but I
Imagine like
100%,
the life they have. It's like they're
that's
going big
exactly,
places. They're going big places. They're making big moves. That because
no, I like you
I was
said
gonna
that.
say,
Yeah, a few times you said that few. I We spoke like 2 episodes ago about this, and I 100% agree with you. Like the moment I see that, I'm like, at least I don't have his life because
exactly.
that would be so miserable. Like living like this when you go and just disliking some other people, where you're like, well, yeah, that's just miserable. Anyway,
At least they're practicing time management. They're just like, you know what? I'm just
yeah,
gonna right
before I
away
even watch.
before.
Well, hopefully he or she gets a lot of things done in this hour. Yeah, so we have Tammy. Hello, Tammy. We have Alex. Hello, Alex. We have hello from Germany. We have, well, I'm just going to say Jason because I know that I'm going to mix it up with Jason and Jason. So we have Jason here. Hey, which project? Okay, let me put this one up. Hey, which project can I make in major project? Please help. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know what the question is about. Uh, okay, next one. Thank you so much for your courses. You're a great teacher. Oh, uh, what's the name? What's his name
This
or her name?
I have two girls.
So you
That's
have
great.
two.
Yeah, that's I have Gracie and Olive.
And which one was this one?
That was Olive. Yeah,
And
she
which one
always
was in
tried.
a photo?
Probably Olive also, because Olive's
Probably.
the one that likes to sit on the desk a lot. They're so funny because not to take this conversation off topic, but Olive,
Oh, it's already
she,
off topic.
yeah, if Olive, sees if Gracie sees like a bug, she's kind of like curious. She wants to kind of befriend it, be very gentle with it. When Olive sees a bug, she just destroys it completely. And those are like basically their personalities. And so it's just funny. I'm like, oh, look at Gracie like being cute with this bug she found. Then all of a sudden Olive comes from nowhere, tears it to shreds, and like nothing
what
happened.
about the
And so
what about with each other? Do they fight like that or no?
they practice jujitsu, I would say. Like they do fight, but they play fight. You could tell. You could tell they're play fighting, but they do get rambunctious for sure. Um, you
Yeah, I
know.
always need to be a referee when my ones decide to, especially. And the fun part is that it's usually in the middle of the night, like let's say 2 o'clock. They
Oh, that's
decide
when
that
they're
they're
awake.
just gonna
Yeah.
start, chasing each other and fighting. And of course, they wake up the whole house, and then I have to be a referee and start, you know, putting one in one corner and then the other one actually follows and keeps fighting. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
We have Tammy, John, 4 a.m. You must be really beat by the time the streams roll around. Yeah, well, that's the thing, Tammy. By the time I'm done, I'd go back and actually have breakfast and go back to sleep because otherwise, yeah, I probably wouldn't even last till whatever 8 o'clock at night if I would be like waking up at 4. So yeah. So we have hello, 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 hello. Bad connection. Yeah. Today we're maybe I don't know. Maybe there's a storm somewhere. Uh. Okay. See. So Jason made a joke. Paul was offended that you didn't like the turkey, so he left. Remember when I said that I don't like
Yeah,
turkey?
seriously, John. Seriously. Yeah. It disconnected me right up, I get it.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
they actually, yeah, the Tammy also is saying that because probably I didn't like the turkey, so you're just like, well, whatever. I'm not dealing
well,
with this guy.
listen, I mean, coming from where I come from, we're paranoid. So I love turkey. I love American apple pie. They're delicious and everything is good.
Yeah, as far as American food, I pretty much like everything, and I like the fact that you can get everything because my big complaint about England is like there's no like different cuisines whatsoever. I mean, okay, there is Indian and there's whatever stuff, but and that was how many years ago when I was there. So maybe a lot of things, of course, have changed and whatnot. But I like in the United States that you can get pretty much sample from any part of the world, and I do like everything apart from turkey. Just birds don't like I don't know. It's not my thing, I guess. So we have Alex. I think you should make Pern course, John. There are a bunch of Mern courses out there, but not that many jobs that use Mongo. However, no courses. A bunch of jobs require progress. Yeah, Alex, that's basically a plan. So again, the idea behind this Mern course was in general because I was getting a bunch of requests in the Node course because I did prepare some vanilla setups where essentially I have the vanilla JS application where I showcase some kind of feature. So there's a API, and then I showcase how you would make the request, just so people see the other side, not just the postman, not just postman request, but also how would you do that from the front end. But people were requesting, hey, can you like make a more of a course thing where there's entire front end and then there's a back end. So basically, that was the idea behind the Mern why it's done. And yes, there will be the Pern course eventually, but for that one, definitely need to somehow incorporate the SQL. I haven't figured out how.
I mean, that's why I'm always focusing on Postgres as a backend database, just because SQL is so common. Um, so I'm looking into, like, I'm making that transition into Node and getting better. Like right now at work, we're using Strapi, so I'm kind of doing a lot of that stuff. But I do want to create a Node backend. I guess you use SQLize. It'll allow you to work with Postgres with Node. But that's like the step I'm on right now, trying to figure all that stuff out. So that course will be very, very useful, or part of the course.
So I do have a question, and so basically just to complete this answer, yes. So it's going to be there, but I first want to finish Mern because I do think that I know it sounds silly, and we have talked about this kind of already here, but the reason why uh, you kind of want to build those full stack projects, and the reason why it's easier to get it up and running with Mongo, even though it's right, the companies there's more SQL jobs and all that. It's because you can build more complex projects as a front end developer, and then you can showcase them when you go and apply. I know that some people might be like, "Hey, listen, what are you talking about? I'm not going to be full stack developer just to be hired to be front end developer." But again, we have talked about this already multiple times where the more complex projects you want to build, the more you want to implement your own logic and stuff. I do have a question for you though. So as far as Strapi and doing the setup, what you're doing, how much of the SQL, like the actual language logic, do you have to use? Or everything is already kind of, you just go to the GUI, you pick up the whatever content types, and you're good to go?
So everything is kind of like pre-built. You kind of have that magic box that handles all of that, but you also have this ability to hook into the backend with these sections in the code, like via hooks, and you could write custom controller code. You still don't have to go as granular as actually writing the actual queries, but you get access to some methods that allow you to do some custom stuff. And they do have ability to do custom, like straight up SQL queries if you wanted to, but they don't recommend it because a lot of that stuff is already pre-built. So I think like for me, that's perfect because using Strapi, my goal is not to rebuild the backend from scratch. My goal is to build a complex backend in the easiest way possible. And that's why I kind of like Strapi, because then I'm able to focus on front-end logic, you know what I mean? In the front-end application. But I think like once people have enough experience on front-end and going into backend, I think understanding how that works from backend perspective is super important for sure. But I'm not doing that right now because it's already too much work, you know?
Yeah, for me, it's I want to basically finish recording that first project with MongoDB, build a more complex one, and then basically use those projects as a way to refresh on SQL, because I did learn some SQL. That was actually one of the useful things that I learned when I was going for software development. Like pretty much the only thing. Rest of it is garbage. Although still good program, good school, and meaning, I mean, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. So I'll if you ever need advice or whatever, just reach out and I'll tell you. But yeah, so that's the plan where and then use those projects as a way to see how you can do those things basically with SQL. And yeah, and then eventually there's going to be course, but yeah, the React is coming out with an update. There's Next.js. There's a bunch of personal stuff that is gonna happen in a few months in my life. So we'll see. Yeah, but Alex, good point, and I do agree with you. So
I was actually gonna make a point because I know my love for Strapi is like pretty big, but you have your reservations. And so here's one argument I would make for people learning Node and building your own backend yourself is that whenever stuff updates, you know the changes you made, and hopefully you don't have any breaking changes. So they're coming out with Strapi version 4, which is going to have a bunch of breaking changes if you try to, let's say, change and upgrade from version 3. So I think like the best thing to do is leave version 3 as it is and just don't worry about it. You know what I mean? And that's like the reality when you're using other people's software. So they definitely going to make changes for the best. But if you kind of build this thing with version 3, like I think, unless you really need to upgrade it, probably, just let it be. I think in our case, I'm still thinking about it. But that's something to watch out for because the way they handle plugins is totally different. The way that they're handling plugins in the new version, which is supposed to be easier and better, but it's just not comparable with the third one.
Well, Paul, so I have 2 points then. We'll have this discussion when there's actually are changes in whatever the version and plugins, because I think that you'll agree with me way more. But no, that's really a joke. It's, again, we talked about this, like my issue was specific, and probably once the versions come out and all that, everything is fine. But there is this one thing where what's interesting, where when we're talking about production, right? So production projects, the companies and whatever. Okay, I'm not gonna use again these generic terms, but it is common for those projects to stay on older versions. So it's not like, hey, React come out, okay, well now I'll just, spend another month to update the code base and whatever. No. And this is kind of, I think it's very kind of hard to convey that message to somebody who's learning. Let's say you start learning Frontend, right? And then I show you Strapi and I say, but look, when the new version comes out, you need to stay with this one because there's going to be changes and blah, blah, blah. And you might have issues pushing up. And this is not some kind of attack on people because, again, it takes time to kind of like, wait a minute, what do you mean? There's a newer version. Why am I building an old one? Am I, worse or whatever? But the case is when you're really talking about, the production, whatever, it's not uncommon for, new React version comes out, yeah, we're still 2 behind.
Yeah, and that's actually like it's very common that not even like people will stay in older Node versions. Not even like the library that they're using in a certain version, but Node. Like my friend was telling me, they're using like Node like from a while back because they would have to refactor a lot of stuff, and that's a very big company, like, and it is very common, and so like it sounds scary, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong if it's working using slightly older technologies if it does the thing that it needs to do. It's perfectly fine. So, but yeah, it's not nuts, but I am still excited for Strapi 4. I think it's going to be amazing. I think the things that they change is going to be great, and what I like about Strapi, and I hope Strapi is watching so I could get a job there. I'm just being honest right now. But the thing that I like about it is that whenever they make break-in changes, if you understand Node very well, you could fix all that stuff. It's not a problem for you. It's just like it's only a problem if you don't understand Backend enough, and then they make the changes, and then you don't know what to fix or what to change to upgrade your code base.
Okay, but let me give you a little pushback. So their biggest selling point, which is true, is the fact that as a front-end developer, you don't need to worry about that stuff. You just install Strapi, you have this nice graphical interface, and you're good to go, right? This is where it comes back when you start spending those 2-3 days. Again, if you're like into backend, like you said, you had your backend developer who had no problem pushing this up to the Heroku, figuring out everything, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But for somebody, especially who's just getting used to the first fetch request, like if there is some kind of plugin update, it's just, I think it's a little. But again, on everything else, I agree with you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right about Strapi is exactly that, and they actually say in their documentation that going from version 3 to version 4, it's like a major change. And so they kind of say like, hey, if you used to like already start a project with 3, stay with 3, and 4 didn't come out yet, it's still in beta, but like if you're going to start something new, start with the newest thing that they came out. And I tried the beta version, and out of the box everything works great. It's just because it's a newer company, so it hasn't been around for that long, and so they figured out better ways of doing things. And so they were like, hey, we have to make a decision. Like, this is a way better way to handle plugins, which makes it accessible to anybody create plugins. And I think what they're going to try to do is create, like, I'm not sure if they're doing this yet, I should know better, but they're going to have this concept of a plugin store where people could develop their plugins and share them, which will basically make Strapi like a way better version of WordPress, because WordPress is in PHP and Strapi is in JavaScript. So, I'm just kidding. Like, both languages are good, but I think like, they had to make some changes to make it more accessible to other developers to be able to make plugins.
And let me like make it very clear. I'm just like, when I'm voicing all of this, it's coming from, basically working with students and whatever. I'm in no shape or form in the position where I fully understand that it's not they can just be like, oh yeah, we'll do this. Of course, you do need to make those decisions and all that. But for me, it has been like this frustrating part where, you're walking through. And that's why, again, I'm not dissing on the actual, the product, but there is a case where if I can make a decision, then I usually go with something that's already in the cloud and I don't have to worry about it. That's it. Where I'm just, I have that thing and then I worry about that one. But as far as building that big custom project without diving Node, for sure, Strapi would be the first option. It just would be great if there would be some kind of sandbox where you're like, okay, I'm using version 4, and regardless of whatever is going to happen, I'm just going to use version 4 plugins and blah, blah, blah. And that's it. And when the version 5 comes out, I'm still able to kind of maybe, keep it up to date or whatnot. I would really like to see the recommendation systems incorporated with React e-commerce projects. By any chance, would that be added in your course in the future? Unfortunately, I don't understand what this means, recommendation systems.
I wonder if he
So,
means like, whenever people buy or select certain projects, like products, there's some sort of algorithm. They'll be like, oh, you selected towels. Maybe you should check out this, and this product. But that's,
but for the front end project,
that's like,
that's literally like
that's a
hard coding
backend stuff. Yeah.
some kind of component that shows up pretty
Yeah.
much every time you okay, maybe you can set up a component where if you pick
Yeah.
this type of product, then you showcase rest of them that are in the category or whatever, but it's not really I'm always very kind of I avoid these algorithm stuff in the front end for simple reason. I don't think that people dive into that at the end of the day anyway. They just copy and paste the code. So what at the end, at the end, what is the real reason then if that's the case? So
Yeah, and I think like a lot of that stuff that they're describing, that logic lives in the back end anyway, and so, and it's not something that is done easily by anyone. It's, takes a lot of work to write that stuff. So I think the problem that they're describing, like the way I understand it, you need to have, like, if you know like what the problem is and you could start to begin to solve it, you could probably already get a job because you know enough about programming. So I think it's, it's like a tough, like it's like a harder problem to solve for anybody who's a beginner or starting out to learn. Like, I don't even see that being like a good option in a course who's just starting to learn. You know what I mean?
I
That's
have
my
a
opinion.
question for you though, since we touched on interesting topic right now. When we're talking about front end and the back end, so every time when I build just straight up front end courses, there's a bunch of logic that I implement just to showcase how to do stuff. I'm talking about
Yeah.
filtering. I'm talking
Yep.
about, pretty much the way it works. You just get the data from somewhere, you dump it in your front end
Yep.
application, and then you set up the logic. What is your approach when you do it? Because when I was doing this MERN one, I very like consciously moved everything to the backend. So the front end
So
is only responsible for making requests. That's it. The moment you make a request, it comes back to data.
yeah, when you're working on smaller projects, doing filtering on the front end is fine, but you have to understand, like, when you're doing filtering on the front end, you're filtering on items that already been loaded into your browser. So I worked on an application that had over 100,000 entries. So you don't want to load 100,000 entries because it'll take 10, 15 minutes and start doing filtering. So all that logic you have to handle in the back end. So, you only get the stuff you ask for and you don't over tax like the front end. And it's something you don't see on smaller projects. And so it's kind of interesting. Like in Strapi, I had to create like this thing where I connect to an API and I have to load all their data and then I have to write it to our database. But Strapi, like, they're like, if you're smart, if you want to query something, we're only going to return first 100 entries because they don't want to over, tax you, and they want to make sure that you're not trying to like get thousands of items. And so with Strapi, like, for me to display all the items, I have to implement pagination that triggers it on the back end. And if I do want to do searching or all that functionality, again, it has to be done to the back end because searching through like 70,000 entries is just kind of ridiculous. So yeah, in my opinion, put it in the back end logic. And I talked to one of my friends who's a senior developer, and he said a lot of times, like, you will have this argument where backend guys, either they have too much work, they'll be like, oh no, you handle it on the front end. But the right way of doing it, like, unless you have a specific reason, is to make sure that all that happens on the back end and the front end is only responsible handling the view logic, but not business logic. That's kind of like where I stand with that argument, because I feel, it makes sense. It makes sense. Just because you can't do it in front end doesn't mean that's the right way of doing it. That's why, like, I want to get better at back end so I could do all that stuff.
That one was for me right away. Also, when I started setting APIs, so the first thing is, it's very easy to get all the items, but when you're setting up that request, the first thing you want to do is right away set up the pagination. Right away, set up
Yeah,
pagination logic right from the get go. So that way the front end can decide, do I want 10? Do I want 20? And that one was kind of when you're working in front end, you're always just looking for, okay, I want to just get all the data and don't worry about anything. And this is the opposite where you're like, yeah, I have the data, but I'm not shipping it to you all, like all of it. I want to make
yeah.
the pages.
And that's a great point. And this is something I just learned. If I would have waited for this live stream, I would have saved some time, but it was after the fact. So at first I was like, let me make sure I could get the data, not realizing how much data that could be. And they could be like hundreds of thousands of items. And so like now I'm like, I got to do pagination. And I think kind of keeping that in mind from the start will definitely save you time. So funny story about pagination. I worked for this like HR company, and they literally were just dumping all the data to the front end. And I remember I was like trying to check something, and I run the query. I know that it works, and the application would literally freeze. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm trying to troubleshoot it. And finally, one of these senior developers comes up to me. This is not the current company I'm working. This is like from a while ago. But comes up to me. It's like, oh no, like he literally said to me, just go grab lunch, come back, and you'll see the data. And I'm like, that's what that I used, and the way he said it, like it's normal. And so I was like, I think we need to have pagination here because this is not like, not gonna work. And they would, every time they would do the demo, they'll be like, yeah, don't take the client to this page because this is way too much data. I'm like, that's not how you do it. Like you got to figure out the right way of doing it. And so, but that was intense. I thought it was broken for like 3 days. I'm trying to figure out what is happening, not realizing that the data is just like huge. It's just insane.
This does bring me to a very interesting point. So maybe if we can do it today, maybe 1 hour and 5 minutes, because I want to
That's fine. That's
answer
fine. Yeah.
Ian's question. But I do want to touch upon this because it happened to me like 2, 3 days or whatever. Yes, I don't remember. Basically, there's a website that I use to scroll to the news from back home. It's pretty typical CNN, Fox News type of thing. Just go there, read the news, whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the most popular where I'm from. So I bet there's like 20 developers working at least on that application. And yet there's this silly bug where essentially there's two nav bars in the application. There's one for the entire thing where you can log in and whatever, and there's one for the page. And the one that is the main one actually is fixed. And what happens, you cannot kind of scroll past, you cannot get to the page because it covers right away the page. And I always like the reason why I'm always kind of I always start laughing when I see this because I think there's this idea of like from people where yeah, like somebody built some project, maybe side project, and yeah, this feature doesn't work. And this is literally company of developers, and bugs happen to everybody. There's some kind of setups. So this idea that there's this magic world where everything works, and there's a bunch of places where you go and there's like such a silly bug. You're like, well, it's interesting how they didn't catch that, but everyone's human. You do make mistakes. So.
And what's like even more insane that having application with no bugs doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There's a lot of bugs, and basically they have different level of severity. Like, does it break the application? No, not really. So what? We'll come back to it another day. And so there's this backlog of bugs for a majority of companies where it's like, unless it's super serious. And for me, before I started working, I thought that you should never have that. That's impossible. And so I'm always trying to but that's something you strive to accomplish because sometimes you have bugs like that you don't even know what they are. And like you don't even see them until someone does like a weird thing or not. You know what I mean? That's kind of crazy.
And also sometimes they become feature.
Right. Yes. That's true. That's true.
When it's a bug long enough, then it becomes a feature eventually.
JavaScript has some of those features we're talking about that they're like, you know what? It's a feature. Yeah.
Okay, we have Ian, the Bayless code. Hey guys, what is your take on React Native? Have you thought about making a course on it after MERN or Next.js? Thank you, Ian, for question. Thanks for all the support. I don't have much of an opinion. Again, the only opinion I had a conversation with the phone developer about that, and he was raving about what's the Kotlin, not Kotlin, whatever. one of the Flutter, I think.
Flutter, yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't that fan of a React Native. For me, I think that if I would pick up the the mobile, I think that would kind of make sense because it's I assume that it's somewhat close to React. So
Yeah, like I never tried it. At some point, I want to try it, but I figured like if you work on a project which already has a lot of React developers and you want to have some sort of mobile like companion application, like it would make sense just to do it in React Native because you have a lot of developers that already know React. You don't need to create a whole new application like using, the phone specific language like Kotlin or whatever iPhone uses nowadays. And so that makes sense. But if you're looking to go into just mobile development, like I think do your research and find out like which platform you want to write code in and figure out what's the best, in your case. But as a React developer, if someone said build me a iPhone app or Android app, I'll be like, okay, React Native. Why? Because I already know React, and so that makes sense to me, so
yeah, there should be very little like what's the name, transition. I mean, if you know how to make that one, then it should be pretty easy. I think it should do it. I mean, thanks to everyone who showed up and asked questions, and I'll read through the comments of what is your opinion on the MERN course. What's the proper approach? And thanks to Paul for coming. He's in the middle of a bunch of personal big things in life, and so I really appreciate the fact that he took a time and was able to come and you want to sound off?
Yeah, I was just say sorry about like a few times disconnecting. It's definitely my computer is just moved half of my stuff out already, and so I think my Wi-Fi is a little spotty. So thanks for dealing with that, guys. And no, I'm definitely going to be here. I don't want to miss these out. And thank you, John. Always a pleasure. I love our debates about the validity of Strapi and why people should use it. It's very important. Like my my question would be like, Strapi is easy. It's good. If Strapi salespeople are watching and they want to hire the best salesperson in the world to represent Strapi, I'm the guy. I could do that.
Did you apply for the position that I sent you?
Thanks everybody.
Did you apply for a position that I sent you?
I'm going to.
I think
not yet.
Not
yet. I've said I'm going to. I'm a little nervous. But to be honest, that made me think. It's like I work with Strapi all the time. I use Strapi all the time. I talk about Strapi all the time. Why not apply with Strapi? Like it's not gonna hurt. So you're onto something, John. I think that's.
And I don't think that you're out of the ballpark there. I mean, I didn't check the requirements specifically, but I don't think that it's like so out of this world that you couldn't.
I think it literally said have to have this hat, has to be Russian, and kind of know Strapi. I think that was the requirement. So I'm gonna apply.
Well,
makes sense.
And all of those, you're just like above.
yeah, exactly. It's like I wrote it. I wrote the requirements myself. Yeah, no, 100%. But as always, it's great chatting. Yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you everyone, and we'll end on the lovely Strapi note. Yep, sounds good.